Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. We are at the end of the year, which is obviously a very exciting time, and I have recently wrapped up, I released my video yesterday, my Big Fat Eyeshadow Project, where I actually ended up using all my palettes and make exclusive looks with them, and I gave them some ratings. So today's video is going to be me going through the rankings of these palettes and let you know what is ranked the lowest up until the highest, to kind of give an idea of what my favorite palettes are in my collection. You need to keep in mind that I used 4 different categories when I did my rankings. I used color story, versatility, quality, and personal ranking. So there might be a palette that has very limited versatility, for example, that I absolutely love, or there might be a color story that is pretty basic, but again, I absolutely love, or the quality is amazing. So in those cases, the score is obviously not the highest, but it's a good way to see what my all-around best palettes are in my collection, so I'm excited to share that with you today. I'm gonna jump into the ranking, but before I do so, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. So we're starting at the very bottom with the lowest ranked palette, and that one comes from Colourpop. This is my Aha Honey palette, and this one ranked in at 10 points. I believe this one ranked in a bit lower because it is so limited when it comes to what you can do with it. You can make a yellow tone like look, and there's nothing really that's too deep, so you can't really go like very smoky or anything. And yeah, there's just a lot of limitations to this palette. I do like it, but it's also not like a favorite, and the quality isn't the best. So because of all of those reasons, he ended up scoring quite low, so 10 points for this one, and that is the first palette. Then for the next section, we have 2 palettes scoring in the same point, and that is 11 points. First up, we have the Urban Decay Stone Vise palette. This one looks like this on the inside. This one has some beautiful kind of shimmery shades, very dimensional shimmer shades, but I do feel like it's quite limited again due to the mattes, and the quality is nice. It's not my favorite quality in my collection, but overall it's a good palette. It's just not a favorite for me, and also again it is quite limited what you can do with it, so that one comes in at 11 points. And then also at 11 points we have the Natasha Nona Love palette. This is a palette that does not have the best quality. Natasha Nona usually have better quality than this, but this one, yeah, again, isn't the best. And also the color story is, it kind of throws me off a little bit, so again that ranked a little bit lower there. And it's also a palette that isn't like a favorite of mine, so again, a couple factors that made it score a little bit lower, but yeah, it doesn't mean that I hate this palette or anything. I do actually quite enjoy a couple that is scoring a bit lower. But yeah, this one comes in 11 points. So the next section is a little bit larger. This is for 12 points, and I have 7 palettes in this section. The first one we have is my Luna Beauty Eternal Eclipse palette, which is one of the last ones that I ranked in my ranking. This one comes in at, like I said, 12 points. Again, it's just like a bit of a smoky color story, so it's not a color story really for me. I also feel like there's missing like a couple mid-toned shimmers, and the shimmers I think are a little bit too deep compared to the mattes. And yeah, just not my favorite color story, not my favorite palette for like what I like. So again, 12 points for this one, and yeah, it comes in towards the bottom. Let's do these 2 palettes next because they're both mini Natasha Nona palettes. We have the Mini Gold palette, which is a green color story. This one I used to love because I love greens, but I have gone off them a little bit recently. The reason why again it's a little bit lower is because I think with these £5 palettes they do come in a little bit lower because they have a bit more limitation to them. But yeah, I do like it. It's again not my favorite color story right now, so 12 points here. And same with the Mini Biba palette. This one also came in at 12 points. It is again a little bit more limited what you can do with it. It only has 1 shimmer, and then, you know, a couple shades are a bit, I would say, too similar. So really nice color story. I like the undertones in here, but again a little bit too limited what you can do with it, and again that's why it came in a bit lower. The next palette we have is a Colourpop palette, and that is my Through My Eyes palette. Again, 12 points here. This is a palette that I absolutely used to love. I think it was a really underrated Colourpop palette. I never really heard anyone else speak about this one, but I absolutely loved it, and the versatility that was in here, and the quality of some of the shimmers. Some of the shimmers and some of the shades in here are really not the best quality, but some are superb and some of the best I've tried from Colourpop, so it's very kind of split. But I like the color story, even though it is kind of a little bit all over the place. I feel like if you like look at the color story half and half or like in quadrants. It is really kind of versatile like that. Yeah, it's just I don't see this as fondly as I used to, so again it dropped some points because of that. And yeah, it's quite old in my collection too, so another palette that came in at 12 points. We have another Colourpop palette next, which is the Sweet Talk palette. This one is more of a peachier tone palette, but as you can see, again, the undertones in here are quite limited, which again drew down some points. Yeah, I do like this palette. The quality again isn't the best. It's Colourpop. Colourpop just doesn't have my favorite formula. Yeah, it's a good palette, but again, it's not a favorite, so 12 points for this one. We have another Natasha Nona mini palette. This one is the mini nude palette. This one does have a little bit more variety for me personally because it has different shimmers. However, the shimmers are quite similar, like this one here and this one here. They are different, but like not too different. And then we have a lighter shimmer and then one crease shade, one deepen up shade. So again, not too much you can do with it. Again, the tones are also very similar, so even though you can switch it up a tiny bit, it's just like not the most variety, which it makes sense because it's only a £5 palette, and because of that these kind of smaller palettes will by default I feel fall a bit lower, and I think that's kind of what happened with this one. We have a couple more palettes at 12 points. The next palette is actually a Pat McGrath palette. This is my least favorite Pat McGrath palette. This is the Subliminal palette, which is this one right here. This one is definitely more kind of grey toned and cool toned. It has some blues in it too, and it's a beautiful color story, but again, it's not what I reach for daily. It is really high quality, and like these special shades are amazing, so it's nothing really bad about the quality or like the color story itself. It's just more that it's not a color story for me, so 12 points there. The last Colourpop palette from this ranking is my Golden Coconuts palette. This is one that I do see quite fondly. I do like this color story. I do like the undertones in these shades, but it's just again not an absolute favorite. The quality again is not the absolute best. It is good for Colourpop, but compared to other things that I have in collection, it's not, you know, up there. Also, the versatility in this one is a little bit more limited, so it makes sense that it scores in a little bit lower. So we have two more palettes to go in the 12-point section. The next one is my Nabla Dreamy palette. This one is another palette that I actually really like the color story of. I love these softer tones. It's not like an ultimate color story though, because I don't really like these purples, and quality wise I like the mattes. The shimmers aren't as impactful as I would like, and I just feel like it's a bit repetitive in my collection. I don't have like that kind of connection and fondness to it, so I think also it docked some points there, but that is the next palette in 12 points. And then lastly for 12 points we have the Color Bible palette. This one I feel kind of similar to. I like kind of half of the color story, like these softer tones I really like. I really like this shimmer right here, but these more grey tones I don't really reach for very often. And like for the duochromes and stuff like that, like Mandala for example, sorry I think I pointed the wrong one, Mandala for example, I used to have way better duochromes in my collection, so it's not like I like it, but there's a couple of different reasons why it lost some points. So 12 points for that one, and it's the last one for 12 points. Sorry, I just referred back to my notes and I made a slight mistake. These three palettes here actually came in at 13 points, so that was the next section. I forgot to switch over, so we had 7 palettes in 12 and then 3 palettes in 13, so these were all 13 points. For the next section we have, of course, 14 points, and I have 9 palettes coming in at 14 points. The first one is the Mountain Trail palette. This one is one that I used to think more fondly of, but I'm not into these greens as much. It is a beautiful palette, and it kind of falls there in the middle somewhere. These, I would say from now on, moving forward, these palettes I all kind of like. I would say like 15 points and up are like my absolute like definitely gonna keep palettes, but yeah, 14 points I still quite enjoy, and that's one of these. A palette that I actually absolutely love, it just kind of fell a bit lower because of the limitations of it. It's my Natasha Nona Glam Face palette in light. This one only has 5 shades, and the shades are quite limited. I mean, even this darker kind of brown doesn't go too dark. It's not too different from that one, and there's only 2 shimmers, so quite a limited color story, but it's a no-brainer kind of palette for me, and I did really enjoy my looks with it. The shimmers are also very impactful. The mattes blend really nicely, so quality-wise it's definitely up there. But for me, it is a little bit too limited to be like a perfect palette and score higher. We have my Anastasia SUTY palette next. This one is a beautiful, cooler toned color story. Again, it's obviously limited what you can do with it. It's mainly like neutral, cool tone to like neutrals. It does have like one pop of color, but overall it's mainly just like neutral tones. The quality is good. It's not the best quality in my collection, but I think that's kind of, again, one of the reasons why it's like falling in the middle, because I like it. It's not like a standout palette, but I do really enjoy it still, so 14 points for that one. We have the Natasha Nona Sunrise palette next. I love the color story in here. It's such a fun color story. I just love the tones in here. They're so unique and so like warm, and just, I don't know, I love the color story in here. Quality wise, it's not the best Natasha Nona palette. It's one of the older ones that she has in her line, but I still absolutely love it. Again, it obviously has some limitations. You can mainly just make like warm sunset type of looks. You can't really make anything cool tone at all. So yeah, that's one of the reasons I think, again, why it came in at 14 points, but it is one that I think quite fondly of. I have my Kaleidos Futurism Sashimi City palette. It's the Futurism 7 palette. This one is one that is like right up my alley when it comes to color story. Again, it's quite limited. It doesn't go too dark, but those are like the no-brainer palettes for me. But when I was honest with the ranking, I needed to admit that these palettes are, again, quite limited, so that is why they came a bit lower. But I absolutely love this palette, and similar with the next one, is a color story that is right up my alley and what I'm going for at the moment, but it's just a little bit too limited to score any higher. And like I said, it's the same with the next one, which is the Huda Beauty Nude Light Obsessions. This one looks like this. Again, it is those kind of romantic, soft undertones that I absolutely love. This one has some beautiful shimmers too. I do prefer the shimmers in the Kaleidos palette. It is more of a special type of shimmer, but yeah, this one is still really beautiful, and I think this is something that I could potentially pan in the future, because I think I would enjoy every single look that I make with it. But again, it doesn't go too deep. It's very light. I mean, it is the light version of the nude range. They have a medium and a rich as well, but yeah, this one obviously stays quite light, which makes it quite limited, but I still love it a lot. So we have 3 more palettes for the 14 section. Next up is an Odenside palette. This is the Hey Reindeer palette. This was the Christmas release from 2023, sorry. This one is my least favorite of the Christmas releases that I have. I do still like it. It's a great quality. There was a couple shades that I had to like work a little bit harder with, which again, I think docked that point. And the color story is inspiring. It's like you have to think to get it working, but it's again not the most like, I don't know, it's just, I think the Odenside specifically with these Christmas releases have made better palettes with more like mind-blowing color stories. This one seems a little bit random to me, even though it is still like, it still boosts my creativity, but it's a little bit random. So I think that's again why it ranked a little bit lower, but 14 points. So 2 more palettes to go in that category. Next one is the At First Sight palette from Colourpop and Raw Beauty Christy. This one looks like this. It has some beautiful, colorful kind of mattes. They are like a bit deeper, but not like too deep so that you lose the color in them. There's only 2 shimmers, and the shimmers really aren't my favorite, but there is a palette I do like. It is of course quite limited due to those shimmers, but overall it is a well-made palette. And then lastly, for 14 points, we have the Hela palette from Angelica Nyqvist and Odenside. So Odenside, of course, released this one a couple of years ago. I don't know how long exactly, but I never really had it in my collection up until this year. I got it sent to me from a subscriber, and I'm very grateful for that. And I always adore these like warm greens with the pinks, which this one has. So the color story is definitely up there. The quality is not the best Odenside quality that I've tried. The Christmas releases that I have is definitely better. I feel like the newer releases have better formula than this, but it's still not a bad formula, and it still has some absolutely beautiful shimmers, and the mattes perform pretty nicely. So I do still enjoy this palette. It is a little bit limited because you can mainly do colorful looks with it, which is something that is, you know, it has unique undertones in it, but I can't really pull this one in for like an everyday look, which is fine, but that also meant that it's a little bit less 4 points there. So next section we have is 15 points, and I have 9 palettes here as well. First up we have the Viseart Paris Edit palette, which is actually the last palette that I rated in my series. This one is such a beautiful color story. I think it's such a clever color story because it has both warm and cool tones, but they still work together. You don't really like, I don't really look at this palette being like, oh god, this is a split between warm and cool tones, because they just have a similar undertone and they just like work so well together. Yeah, I just think it's a beautiful palette. It isn't like an absolute favorite, but but it definitely is one that I think fondly of, so 15 points for this one. We then have a Pat McGrath palette. This one here is the Midnight Sun palette, which is the newest palette in my collection. This one was sent to me from a subscriber as well. Very, very grateful. I worked on this one in my product level up. Yeah, I do think this is a beautiful color story. It's not my favorite Pat McGrath palette, of course, because it's not ranking the highest, but I still think it's absolutely stunning. It has some beautiful, beautiful special shades. It's a very nice autumnal color story, and I loved all 3 looks that I made with this palette, so 15 points for this one. We then have another autumnal color story. This one here is my Metropolis palette from Natasha Nona. This one looks like this. It has quite a few shades in it, and again, as you can see, it's a very autumnal palette. This one is a little bit more like saturated, I would say. Like, it has some more kind of vibrant-ish orange tones, some more vibrant-ish greens. I would still count this one as more of a neutral palette. Well, not neutral, but like neutral adjacent palette. Yeah, it's a beautiful one. I do really like it. It's not the favorite like quality in my collection, and I do sometimes get overwhelmed with this palette, but it's definitely one that I want to get more use out of, and 15 points for it in my ranking. We then have my Amrisi palette from Anastasia. This one looks like this. It's a beautiful color story again. It is my undertones, but I just feel like it's a bit repetitive, and it's a bit limited what you can do with it because it is so repetitive. Also, the quality in here isn't like the best. It is good, but again, not the best. It's Anastasia. It's a bit older, so this one again comes at 15. I do like it, but it kind of falls in the middle, which it kind of shows with the points too. We have 2 Natasha Nona midi palettes next. The next one is the Natasha Nona Bronze palette. This one is one that I absolutely adore. I love the undertones in here. I love the richness of the shades in here. This one is like a medium toned palette, like medium to deep. Which is usually not what I go for, but I absolutely love the undertones, like I said, and I just love the looks I get with this palette. I just feel like they're so rich and yummy, and yeah, I do really like it, but it is very limited. It can only make a certain type of look. Yes, you can make variations of that look, but it's very limited. The quality is really nice and everything, but yeah, it's quite limited due to the shade range in here. And then the second one that we have, which is also Natasha Nona mini palette, is the Sendo palette. This one is one that I got passed down to me, or I purchased from my friend. Actually, I didn't get handed on, I purchased it from her, but this wasn't a palette that was on my radar originally, but I have actually really grown to love this one. I love these kind of more peachier tones, and I love these greens, and I love how they are together. This is definitely a palette though. When I talked about the visual palette, how I said like you can't really see that it's a split half and half. This one you can definitely see there's a split of like warm tones versus like the more cooler tone green kind of shades. But they work together. You can make some really nice contrasting looks. So super happy with this one too. But it's not, yeah, again, our favorite, and there's definitely areas where this one does have flaws, so 15 points. So we have a couple of palettes at 15 points. The next one is also a Natasha Nona palette. This one is a mini palette. This one is the retro palette. I think this is the retro palette that scores in the highest, and I think it's a bit more versatile due to the undertones, and I do also love these undertones. It's also a very, very fun creative color story. So yeah, this one comes in at 15 points. The next palette we have is the California Coast palette. This is from Sydney Grace, and it is a beautiful undertone palette as well. I feel like even though this is a neutral palette, it has some unique undertones. They have like a bit of a rosier tone to them, which I love, especially for cool tones. These are very much my type of cool tones, so that's also kind of why it scores a little bit higher than some of the other cool tone palettes that I have. Yeah, I do like this palette a lot. It's not like an absolute favorite again, because again, it falls somewhere in the middle, but again, like I said in the beginning, these palettes from like 15 points and up are palettes that I really do enjoy still, and this is definitely one of them. And the same with the next one, which is the Lovelies palette. This one is from Beauty Bay, and it looks like this. It is a bit limited because it doesn't have too much darkness to it. There's a couple shades, but it again is quite limited. However, I love these soft romantic undertones. The shimmers are absolutely beautiful and very, very sparkly. And all around, it's a nice palette for me, but it's not the most versatile, which again, it made it not score any higher. But yeah, that is the Lovelies palette coming in at 15 points, and it's the last one for this category. For the next category, we have 16 points, which I have 7 palettes in. The first one we're going to kick it off with is this palette here, which is from Pat McGrath. This one is the Divine Rose 1 palette, which is again more of a cool tone palette. It is more mauve toned, and it does have some more kind of cool tones, but it also has a bit of warmer mauves in it too, which makes it a little bit more versatile. But again, it's obviously not like the most versatile palette or anything. It is a really beautiful one though, and it has some absolutely amazing special shades, especially this one here. These more are kind of more like not as sparkly, they're still special, but this one here still is the show for sure, and that is my favorite shade in the palette. But overall, it's a nice Mothership palette. It's not, again, a favorite. Well, no, I wouldn't say it's a favorite, but it's definitely one that I do quite enjoy. Also at 16 points, we have an Odenside palette. This is the Red Dragon palette, which was in collaboration with Judy. This one is definitely a color story that I really enjoy as well. Not as much anymore because now I'm into more of those romantic tones, but it actually is something that I probably could have, like, it's similar to what I'm wearing on my eyes today. Not fully, but yeah, these type of tones I used to adore and I still like. And I have gotten a lot of use of this palette this year. I had planned on 2 shades, this one here and this one here, and obviously used it in this project too. And I definitely got a better understanding of this palette and I do really like it. So 16 points with that. And yeah, that is the next one. We have 2 more Mothership palettes at this ranking. The next one is my Bronze Seduction palette, which looks like this. This is definitely a color story that is a little bit more me than the Divine Rose one, which actually scored in the same points though. This also has a bit more of those kind of sparkly shades, like these 3 special shades are more sparkly, which I absolutely adore, and it has some of my favorite, again, special shades. However, I think this one is a little bit like deeper for me. Yeah, like these mattes a little bit deeper. McGrath is really good at shearing out her eyeshadows, though. You can use them in your crease, you can shear them out. This one isn't as easy. I think there's a little bit of a discrepancy when it comes to the quality. It's not bad. It's really, really good still. But compared to some of our other palettes, these like darker mattes are a little bit harder to shear out, which I think is why I find it a bit deeper than her other palettes. So that's probably why it doesn't come in higher, because otherwise I feel like this color story is very much me. Then also at 16 points, which is very surprising to me because I thought this was going to be my least favorite Mothership palette, but I have actually fallen in love with it, and that is the Divine Rose 2 palette. At first glance, this is definitely one that I was gonna skip. I purchased this one very discounted from my friend, which is why I got it into my collection, but I just thought it was too bright, too pink. It's not something that I could reach for every day, and I was kind of wrong. Like, of course there is some brightness, but if you take away this bright shade, yes, it's still a little bit brighter than the other Motherships, but it's just a lot of beautiful peachiness and the type of tones, again, I like. It doesn't have my favorite special shades, if I'm being honest, but overall it is a super stunning palette, and I was surprised by this, and I really liked all the looks that I made with this palette, which again is probably the main reason why it ranked in so high compared to where I thought it would land. So we have a handful more palettes for 16 points. The next one is the Wilderness palette from Beauty Bay. This one is a beautiful, brighter color story, and it does have a lot of kind of, yeah, it's almost like I'll say like an autumnal rainbow palette. It does have a lot of different undertones, and it does makes this one quite versatile. It's not the easiest for like a neutral toned look though. You do have some more neutral-ish leaning shades, but I would still say they're a little bit brighter. So that is kind of the main limitation with this palette, but overall it's a beautiful one, and it's not one that I like see as one of my favorites, but it's definitely one that I still am very fond of, and I do like the looks that I make with this palette. Another palette that I'm surprised is scoring this high, which, well, yes and no, because this palette is very, very, very adored by a lot of people, but I never really thought I liked this very much, but clearly I like it more than I thought, and I guess that's like the surprise to me. But that is the Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde palette. This one looks like this on the inside. I was always just a bit like, not sure about it. I think maybe some of the shades in here threw me off a little bit, so I was never really sure about this palette, but when I made my looks with this, I really liked the looks. I feel like it was a good palette to work with, so yeah, ranked higher than I thought. I mean, again, it kind of checks out because a lot of people love this palette, yeah, so do I now. So really glad that I managed to fall in love with this palette more, and I'm very happy to have it in my collection. And then lastly, for that specific ranking, we have the Elva palette from Odenside. This is one that looks like this, but you can make some beautiful sunset looks with this one, and it's a little bit warmer leaning, which I think is why I like it, because I do love warmer mauve tones. So yeah, that is the last palette for this ranking. So we're getting towards the top, and we have 17 points next, and we have 5 palettes for that ranking. The first one is the Snow Dreams palette from Odenside. This one looks like this. It's a beautiful, beautiful color story. I do like it quite a bit, and I love these kind of green tones. I love like these, like there's a lot of special sparkly shades in here, very, very dimensional, very sparkly, very impactful, so I love that. And it's just a fun color story, and I do really like it. It's not my favorite Christmas release, but it's getting up there. Again, it is 17 points. I think I have one coming in at 18 and one coming in at 19 if I remember. But so it's up there, it's not much lower down. And unfortunately I was only able to make 2 looks with this one in my Big Fat Eyeshadow project, but I'm excited to reach for this one more because it does excite me a lot. And yeah, very happy with this palette. Also at 17 points we have my Natasha Bronze Diva palette. This one is just such a useful palette. I love the undertones in here. I love like the different rows. So this top row is more like camel tones. This one has some more like kind of rustier, like warm, I don't know, like warmer tones. I can never describe this one. And then here we have some more cool tones. So a very fun color story, and again, quality is impeccable. It's so good, and it's a very useful palette. You do have 3 shimmers which are versatile enough, but my favorite way to use this one, which I did not need to do in the Big Fat Eyeshadow project, is to pair this one with my singles, because you have every matte you can need for like a neutral look. But on its own, I did actually enjoy it more. I didn't think I would like the shimmers in here as much as I did, but I did, and it was a very fun palette to play with. So 17 points. Also from Natasha Nona, we have my newest Natasha Bronze palette. This is the Yoka palette. It's one I got from my friend for my 30th birthday, but I actually didn't receive it until earlier this year, just because we didn't see each other basically between my 30th and then. But it was my 30th present, which was in November last year. So this one is a beautiful color story. Again, it has those greens, but for some reason I just were drawn to these greens more. They're a bit more like unique, undertoned. And I just love the looks I can make with this one. You can make some amazing creative looks. The shimmers are so good. I'm excited to try more of the newer palettes from Natasha Bronze because these are so dimensional and like that kind of sparkly format that I really like. And yeah, overall, it's such a good color story. Like, impeccable, one of the most creative color stories that I have. And you can also make some more neutral looks. You have those browns and more orangey tones, or you can stick with those greens or mix them all up. So very good palette, and I did really enjoy my time with it. So 17 points. So we have 2 final palettes in that section, and the next one is another Pat McGrath palette. I believe, no, it's on my highest rank. It's my 2nd highest rank, which actually surprised me. I thought this one would rank higher, but it doesn't. Maybe it's because I was in different moods when I rated these. But this one is the Utopian Dream. This is the one I would personally pick as my favorite, but you know, quality and versatility and stuff like that probably played a part. But I absolutely love this palette. It was my first Pat McGrath Mothership palette, and I love the special shades again in here. They're super sparkly and beautiful, the type that I love. I love these like mattes, and they're not too deep, and they are like those kind of soft romantic undertones that I like. So honestly, this is like the Mothership palette for me. I absolutely love it. Again, it must have docked points for like versatility and things like that, and that's probably why it came in at 17 points. The next Mothership that I have comes in at 18 points, I believe, so very close anyway. But yeah, really love this palette. It's one of my favorite palettes in my collection. So that's what I mean. Even though it's coming at 17 points, I would definitely put this one quite high. I mean, it is very high still, but personally, on like a personal ranking, put this on probably like my top 2 or 3 palettes. So there is other factors of course coming into play, but that's kind of what I meant with this ranking. But it's still a very good way to show, like, to get a better understanding of the palettes, I guess. And then the final palette I have for 17 points is my Star Wars Mandalorian palette. This is one that I have always loved since I got it. I got this one for my boyfriend for Christmas, I believe, on my birthday quite a few years ago now, but I love it. It's such a good color story. The greens in here are so unique. It's just, even though they're green and they're like, I mean, there's not, I mean, taking away these, there's not that much wearableness in it. Like, it doesn't look like neutrals, but I can wear these like neutrals, and I absolutely love them. It's such a good palette. I have talked about this over and over again, so you already know that I love this palette. So we have come to the 2nd highest ranking, which is 18 points. Granted, 20 points would be the max, but we only have 18 and 19 points. So the rest of the palettes come in at either 18 or 19 points. The next section has 6 palettes in it, and again, this is for 18 points. So first up in that section, we have Kaleidos Club Nebula. This is again such a beautiful color story. It's a very unique color story, and again, it's a very fun one. I love it. I love every look that I make with this palette. The shimmers are very sparkly and dimensional, and the mattes are like dark, but they still keep their colorful undertone, which is very unique. And I can be very creative with this palette, so I love whenever I make a look with it, and it's a very fun one. So 18 points here. Again, not much to flow when it has such a high point, so you kind of are probably going to sound repetitive for the next couple palettes. And then again, we have that Lost Polisher palette that I mentioned, which is from McGrath, of course, and that is the Moonlit Seduction palette. This one, I'm surprised is coming in so high because I didn't think this would be a perfect palette for me. This is a palette that I wasn't even sure I was going to pick up, so I'm surprised that I'm ranking it so high, but I love all looks that I make with this palette. It is something that you can make really simple, neutral looks with. You can make like smokier looks, going out looks. There isn't too much like colorfulness to it, but overall I really enjoy my time with this palette, so yeah, 18 points for this one. We then have actually two Anastasia palettes, which again is surprising because it's up there with like these like higher end brands and like indie brands and stuff like that, but I do love both of these palettes. We have the Subculture palette, which actually isn't just the Subculture palette. This is a mix between the Subculture and the Jackie Aina palette. It has both of my favorite shades from both palettes, so you know, it's kind of like a favorite for me. I took away all the shades I don't like, so it's like I love every single shade in here, and I just love the undertones in here. I love how these like, I just love this section. I love these warm, like rusty kind of oranges and the warm sunshine yellows together. It's like an autumnal palette of my dream, and I really love how I made this palette. Of course, you can't purchase this one this way, but absolutely love it. I love my looks with it. I love looking at it. It just makes me very happy, so 18 points. And then the other one is my Norvina palette. This is the original Norvina palette though. I just love the undertones in here. Again, these are like those romantic undertones that I love, that I have repeated over and over again in this palette, oh sorry, in this video. Yeah, I just have some of my favorite shades. I love this pink here, and the shimmers are super impactful, very beautiful. And it's just like a neutral palette of my dream. It does have some more like neutral leaning tones, but then it has like those, again, romantic, soft, pinkish undertones too. So very, very beautiful palette, and again, I rate it very highly. Then we have my second to last Christmas release from Odenside. This is the Merry Christmas palette, which I actually thought originally was going to be my favorite. This is the one that has like the greens and then like the more reddish kind of warm tone shades. I absolutely love this one. I love the undertones in here. I love the, again, split. You can make some really creative looks mixing both, but it is still very cohesive. This one was in my product level up for my level 4, so I had 4 palettes in here, and I used every single shade 4 times, so I got to know this palette quite a bit, and I absolutely loved my time with it. It was very, very fun to pan, and yeah, it's a very well made palette. Quality is impeccable, very, very good. Shimmers are beautiful, and mattes perform really well, so 18 points for this one as well. And then the last palette for 18 points, we have my Rose Quartz palette from Huda Beauty. This one is such a good palette again. This one looks like this. It has those cooler tones, but again, those kind of more like pinkier undertoned cool tones, which is the ones that I love. This is definitely one that is super, super beautiful, and it also has some absolutely amazing sparkly kind of shades, which is surprising for a mainstream brand. But yeah, very good palette all around, and I love this one. Then we have come to my very top palette, and we have 3 to go. These are all of the top ranked palette. They all come in at 19 out of 20 points, so almost a perfect score. They just like lacked 1 point in one section. It could have been like versatility or quality. I don't think quality actually for any of these, but like versatility or color story, I think were probably top 2 for these. But first up, we have the Natasha Nars Gold palette. This one I know for a fact that I ranked 5 for color story, for quality, and personal ranking. I believe the one area where I docked the point was versatility, because of course, like, you can make some more kind of colorful looks, but you can't, like, for example, make a rosier tone look and stuff like that. But for what it is, it's a very, very versatile palette, so I think I dropped the point there. But everything else, perfect score. You all know that I love this palette. I'm so sad this is discontinued, but I'm also so happy that I have it in my collection. I absolutely love this palette. It is for sure one of my favorites in my collection, and I already knew that even before I made this ranking. So this is the first one that comes in as one of my top ranked palettes at 19 points. Then we have another one that I knew was one of my absolute favorite palettes, and that is the Tiny Marvels palette from Sydney Grace. This is such a beautiful color story. It looks like this. It has these kind of like softer undertone shades. It's not necessarily like romantic, but they just have like this softness to them. It is such a beautiful, like, all year around palette. You have some more like autumnal shades. I would say like in this corner here, you have some more spring tone shades. You can wear it for summer with like the pop of like yellow and like stuff like that. Winter too. It's just an amazing all year round palette. It's such a well made palette. It has such a good color story. It is 100% one of the best color stories I think in my collection as well. It just so well thought out. I can't remember where I docked the point for this one. I honestly can't remember, but it must have been in one of the categories, of course. Quality, it's up there. Color story, definitely 5. Maybe it would have been versatility again, because I believe for personal ranking I also would have given it a 5. But anyway, 19 points for this one. I absolutely love this palette. It's such a beautiful one, and it's another one that I definitely cherish, that I have in my collection. Yeah, definitely recommend this one. I don't even know if they make this one still anymore, but I think they should do it. I think at least last year they were still making this palette, but if they do, definitely pick it up. It's such a good one. Then the very final palette we have on our list, which is ranking the same as the last two, is my Christmas Eve palette from Odenside. This is the last of the Christmas releases, and I'm surprised that this one was my favorite, but it is. It's such a good palette. I love this look. I remember when I made the looks with this, I made the 3 looks and I did not want to put this palette down. I had so many ideas of what else to do with it. It just boosted my creativity, and I thought originally it was just like a blue palette, but it's definitely not. It does have obviously some blue tones, but it has like greens, it has more like neutral yellow tones, it has golds, it has silvers. It's just such a good palette. I love this one so much. I rave about it so much. I think it's beautiful. It is, again, it has those contrasting shades, and you can make like neutral tones, you can make colorful looks. So I believe for versatility, I gave it, I'm thinking where I docked the point. It might again be for versatility. I guess I'm very strict with versatility, because again, you can't make like every type of look with this palette, but for what it is, it's so versatile, and I absolutely love this one. Again, it's one that I cherish, and I can't wait to play around with again, because it's been a very long time since I played with this one, because it was early in the year for my ranking. So I might even pull this out now in December for the end of the year, because I have, you know, a week and a half to play with whatever I want before I start my project in January. So very excited, but this is definitely a top favorite palette, which is obviously why it's coming in at 19 points. So there you have it, guys. That was all of my palette ranked. It's going to be quite a long video, so I think I'm going to wrap it up here. Are you surprised by any of the rankings? I mean, if you followed my Big Fat Eyeshadow Project, you would have known kind of where things ranked as well. But just if you haven't, like if you forgot what the rankings were in that project, or if you haven't been following that project, are you surprised by anything? I will have some surprises which I mentioned, but overall, I think it kind of checks out with what I personally felt before. But again, I'm going to wrap it up here. I hope you guys are having an amazing day wherever you are, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye, guys.